Hey there. Today I wanted to talk about being an old soul and what that means and what life might be like if you are an old soul. And what are we talking about when we say someone's an old soul? I think I think I might be an old soul. Some people have said I am, though I don't think I'm the oldest. Maybe I'm more of a middle-aged soul. I've definitely known people who I thought seem to have more of the innate wisdom of a traditional old soul. So when we say someone has an old soul, I'm sure some people mean it literally, like your soul has been around the block a few times. I guess maybe it has to do with reincarnation. But I'm sure that there are other plausible explanations. Maybe just having a differently oriented personality than most people. Or maybe old souls have inherited a bit more of, I don't know, the collected human experience. Because it seems to me that being an old soul means that you have the groundwork already laid for a lot of life's lessons. It's like you've got a head start on everyone else. So an old soul isn't going to be perfect or, the second coming of Jesus or anything. And an old soul is going to have to go through all the same things as everyone else. They're still going to be, a selfish little kid and a moody teenager and all that, but they have already sort of the beginnings, the foundation of something just built into who they are. They seem to understand already the things that they need to learn later on in life, whereas maybe most people don't. They're kind of just blank slates to begin with and need to start from scratch. In some ways, it's almost like we've been through this before. We inherently seem to know that the material world and this life isn't it. Just what's around us isn't everything that there is to existence. And being an old soul it manifests itself from the beginning. So in childhood, you can look back if you are an old soul and see how it affected those years of your life. For me, I always felt more comfortable around adults when I was a child. I didn't really get along very well with my peers. I didn't feel like I could relate to them. And maybe, it wasn't that I didn't have friends or anything. Certainly I did. But it just felt like there was more of a disconnect. And maybe that's because the children around me, valued things that I just couldn't care less about. And their mind was just in a different place. They were like a little bit behind me when it came to catching on to, I don't know, what life is about. And let me stop for a minute and say that this video and the stuff I'm saying isn't supposed to be self-aggrandizing or anything. I'm not saying pat me on the back, I'm a great guy, because I definitely was and still am just a normal person who just has a different perspective, had a different experience than most people in life. And it's not better or worse, it's just what it is. And I don't say it to make myself appear like I was special or anything. Not being able to relate to your peers isn't necessarily because you're better than them. Although, maybe with kids, it's like, kids can be so, I don't know, so cruel and vicious, and I always instinctively knew that you shouldn't do that. And I just wanted to drop out of that sphere of social whatever. I didn't want to be part of my peers because so much of what they cared about seemed pointless, and it was all about children are just very selfish as they're growing up. And, kids can be very competitive, and I didn't care. I just dropped out of it because I think I inherently knew that winning wasn't everything. Winning didn't really matter as much as the cliche of playing the game. And all of my peers, I mean, you know how kids are. That's what they care about the most, is winning. And they'll shove it in your face if they beat you at something. And part of it also is that I just wasn't very good at, sports. And so I was like, well, maybe this is a little bit of self-preservation of my ego also. I just didn't see the point in a lot of it. And then, of course, as you get older, it continues to manifest itself and you continue to feel different than everyone else. Like, it's almost like you have your eye on this greater picture that no one else seems to see. Everyone else is looking. It's like you've all got a map and everyone is zoomed in on their map to, street view. Meanwhile, you've zoomed out so that you can see everything, the whole country. It's difficult to explain, but it always felt like no one else had their eyes on the bigger things. It was just like the immediate, whatever was happening now, the next new thing. And when you're a kid, everything's new, and so it's understandable. And even when you're as old as a teenager and you're in high school, people are still really big into the next big thing and all the trends and whatever, and I just never related to it. Not that I was free of all of it, I've jumped on a trend or two, but for the most part, I just couldn't understand it. Why would you care? You can't make yourself care about something you don't care about. You know what I mean? That's really what it comes down to. And I think an old soul is going to value the things that have come before and be able to more clearly see one's place in history, to a degree at least. Meaning that we know inherently that new isn't always better, and that there are answers that people have figured out in the past that we need to look to and consider, and not just continually throw out the old and try to reinvent the wheel in every generation. And I think that's something that every human being figures out at some point, that I should, it's the stereotypical thing. You think your parents are stupid until you grow up and have kids, and then you're like, oh, my parents were smart. I think an old soul kind of catches on to things like that the past generations were on to something at a much younger age than everyone else will figure that out. Old souls are also kind of destined to solitude and a kind of solitary life. Whether, I'm not sure if that's because that's just what we prefer, or if it's a byproduct of not really being able to relate easily to people. And it could be both. Of course, the irony is, I think an old soul generally enjoys connecting with other people because we kind of inherently know that we have a connection with other people, and that it's a good thing to maintain that connection in the real world, to make genuine connections with other humans, because our spirits are already linked in a way. If you can follow my hippie talk right now. I think an old soul also thinks of life deeply, but maybe takes it more lightly than other people. And if you think about actual old people, if you watch some of those videos on YouTube of 100-year-olds and they're reflecting on their life, how seriously are they taking life? I mean, it's not a big joke to them. Like, you can tell that it's a deep thing to them, but they're not worrying about anything, because they, at 100 years old, I mean, at that point, you've made it that far, clearly something's going right So who knows? Maybe they could last another 20 years. You never know. But they know that the majority of life is behind them, and so why worry about the rest of it? Whereas people my age are full of anxiety because the rest of life lies ahead of us. You know, the majority of your life is still ahead of you, and you're worried about screwing it up. And it puts you in this kind of needy, desperate, fearful mindset where you're afraid of making one wrong step. And everything is so serious. But when you're old, when you're 100 years old, you just have time to reflect on life and realize that I shouldn't have worried about anything. You know, if you ask, I've read articles about people on their deathbed and people who are just really old, 100-year-olds, talking about what their biggest regret in life is, and it was like most of them said, I worried too much. And the first time I read that, it really affected me. When you know, it would be easier to read that article if people said, my biggest regret was killing that guy, you know, because it's like, well, I'm not going to do that. But if someone's biggest regret is worrying, something that you do every day, it's really affecting. And I think an old soul is more prepared to realize that and to come to that point of taking life a little less seriously and actually getting to a point of living each day like it's your last day. And I haven't gotten to that point yet, but I think an old soul is closer to it than everyone else. I think also we kind of just know that this life isn't it. There's something else. Whatever that means to you. I'm not even sure what it means to me. I heard something interesting about living each day as your last, and I want to share that with you because I think it's very profound. And the source I heard it from is another YouTuber. Her name is Amy Young. Now, she does a lot of stuff that's dating advice for women, but she also just has a lot of general life advice that I think is very insightful. And she was talking once about living each day like it's your last, and how a lot of times we view it almost like, I think about if you're going on a vacation to somewhere on the other side of the world, and it's a once in a lifetime kind of thing. And let's say you went to Paris, just as an example, and it's your last day in Paris, and you're looking at the Eiffel Tower, and you're like, this is my last day here. I may never come back for the rest of my life. So I've got to live this day like it's my last day in Paris. And so you're just like trying to take in everything, and you're trying to savor every last bit of your experience so that, you know, you can get as much out of it before you have to leave, because you're never coming back. And some people think that's what living every day as if it's your last, what it means. But Amy said it was so profound. She talked about how she was working at Starbucks and it was her last day. She was quitting and she knew it was her last day there. And it was a job that was kind of unpleasant sometimes, you know, very stressful from time to time. Customers coming in who were maybe rude. And it was the kind of thing that normally would have got to her. But because it was her last day on the job, it didn't bother her. It didn't matter. She wasn't going to be there anymore. And so she actually just enjoyed her last day of working at Starbucks, despite it being the kind of day that would have normally stressed her out. because it was her last day, she enjoyed it. And maybe that's what living each day like it's your last means. It's like not trying to hold on to it so tightly, but letting go. And when you are my age, the idea of letting go of life seems kind of foreign, doesn't it? Because you've got so much of it ahead of you. But when you're 100, you don't have that much, and you know that it's pointless to hold on to it. And I think an old soul maybe is more ready to receive that truth and actually live each day like it's your last. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on old soulness, if you think you are an old soul, what your experiences are. I really appreciate you watching. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.